Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here are your hosts, Joe Kuzma and Brian E. Roach.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Joe Kuzma, and I'm joined today by Mr. Patriot himself, Mr. Brian E. Roach. What's going on, Mr. Patriot? Upcoming 4th of July weekend for everybody. It's an extended weekend because it's a Thursday. I mean, got any big plans lined up?
You know, I had my whole thing I was going to do, and then you called me Mr. Patriot. And it wrecked my vibe because now I'm trying not to throw up on air. Because you can't, I get it. It's the patriotic thing that you're going for. But no. You have to call me Mr. Patriotic Guy because Patriot is, look, I just had to sit through Julian Edelman on Stephen Colbert the other night. Now you're calling me Mr. Patriot? Puke, vomit.
It's better than Uncle Sam. I was trying to get away from the ageist thing. And
wait. See, I have an Uncle Sam story.
Oh, okay. This should be good.
You see. Back in the day, and you remember this because you used to work in a video store.
Yes, oh, yes.
Those are back in the day. I know maybe we've talked about this once before. Back in the day, you went to stores and rented cassettes or video cassettes and put them in a VCR. You couldn't stream stuff. That was what the way you did it when you wanted to watch movies.
I know where this is going, by the way, because I think we had this on the shelf.
Yeah. I worked for a company called Apex Entertainment that produced a film called Uncle Sam. And in this instance, Uncle Sam was a zombie who came back to kill a bunch of people. But in order to promote the video at the buyers' locations, I dressed up as Uncle Sam and wandered around. I had the big top hat. I painted my hair and beard white, had white eyebrows. All I remember about that movie, other than that, I still have some pictures of me as Uncle Sam. I think I still have the hat somewhere, is the lenticular poster, which was this, this poster that as you moved, it looked like the things moved. And people went absolutely. I sold one of those on eBay for $1,000.
No way! Get out of here!
People
for Uncle Sam.
For Uncle Sam.
That movie didn't even make $1,000. I don't think.
Oh no, it did. It was so profitable. It's ridiculous because people rented it and. That's all, it cost like, $8 to make. And so we sold, 100 million copies and people rented it because they had nothing better to do, I guess.
Yeah, me and Brian have shared stories back and forth, but not only about working at video stores. I used to work at a video store, right out of high school, the old Hollywood video chain, and I worked at several of them. I was actually like a shift leader, like assistant manager role there. So I was really in deep with that. And it used to be Please Be Kind, Rewind, and people would complain about their late fees and all that. Now you don't have any of that. Now it's like, you want to rent a movie for $5-6, you just throw on the Fire Stick or the Roku or Apple TV or whatever, and you just stream it from your home, or you go down to the Red Box and get it for $1 or $2, and then you do have late fees still there. But on the other hand, or people just steal it outright, which that's
right.
I'm not going to say anything one way or the other. But there are so many different ways. I mean, you no longer. I remember there used to be 3 of the things you'd put the VHS cassettes into, and they'd be in like on a busy night where there's a bunch of stuff coming back, and the return bin outside. You'd have to go out there in the winter and all that stuff. But anyways, you were saying Uncle Sam, that studio. It was funny because Brian just happened to work for a studio. We were just randomly talking about this, and I found out I didn't know that you dressed up as Uncle Sam, but they made B-movie would be a polite term for these direct-to-video, direct-to-VHS, and in air quotes here, horror movies. They're meant to be of that genre, but this is so cheesy and low budget. And I remember watching one. I think it was called Demonicus, and it was like they unearthed an old demon king out of this cave, and it was just like this skeleton. It would look like something out of like a science class, like a biology class in high school or something, and And you didn't see a lot of the body of it. And I always loved like when something like that or an Uncle Sam would like hack a body part off and there would be like a cut in the film and then you would just see an arm fall off and like all this blood like shoot out like it was like a super soaker that was inside of it with like red food coloring or Kool-Aid or something like that. It was the craziest stuff. But we are reminiscing not just about Uncle Sam and Independence Day. The reason I brought up even the 4th of July here was I know a lot of people are busy on the holiday and it's Thursday. A lot of people are taking off Friday, and that's the same here with Steel City Underground. So if you don't see an extra show from us through the end of the week, don't worry, we didn't disappear. Don't worry, YouTube, knock on wood, hasn't penalized us for anything else that they decided to magically add to their rules. And I won't go any further on that. And you'll just see us the following week is all. But we are reminiscing today. We have a show, and we have some companion articles. I think half of it is already up on the website. The other half is coming out here during the extended holiday break. And it is basically our favorite players from the Heinz Field era, our favorite Steelers, I should say, because it's not all just dedicated to players. So it's our favorite people within the Steelers organization as a whole over the Heinz Field era, which would be from 2002 until the present day. And when we first started thinking about this, myself and Brian, we were like, well, this would be easy. You just rattle off 5 names and it's very, that gets boring. So let's put a little bit of a challenge to this. So we have criteria here, 5 criteria to be exact. An offensive player, a defensive player, a non-player, and then 2 others, which we'll put, we'll leave those as kind of surprise topics as we go forward, just to build the intrigue here. And, it didn't really matter how long they played at Heinz Field. They could have played at Three Rivers, it could have been the twilight of the career or anything like that. But more or less, I think most of our picks went towards contributors during, since the building opened up in 2002. So, it was kind of like, this became challenging in different ways because I know you and I both added and removed and did a lot of things, and this will be something where I think we get a lot of comments from the listeners, and I don't think there's any wrong answers here, and I was even surprised with my own answers, Brian. So just to keep in mind, Heinz Field era, so it's not like I'm going back and throwing Rod Woodson on the list, who's one of my all-time favorite, if not my all-time favorite Steeler, but somebody like a Jerome Bettis qualifies because he had, he played at Heinz Field and he had a few years there, even though it was the end of his career.
Yeah, and it just it morphed for me as I was doing it, because Jerome qualifies, and if Jerome qualifies, he certainly has to be on a list, doesn't he? But I kept thinking, how qualified is he? How qualified isn't he? And so I started, trying to say, well, I looked at guys when I was thinking of this as the majority of their career was in Heinz Field, which would eliminate Jerome, which made me sad.
Yeah. Well, I have to say Jerome actually isn't on my list either, which kind of surprised me when I got to the end of it. And, he's definitely one of my favorite guys. I mean, I was so compelled by Jerome Bettis and going into the Hall of Fame that I had to go and see him there. And I'm going to feel the same way, like if Troy Polamalu, who will be one of my guys here. I'm going to jump to defensive player first since I just mentioned Troy. When Troy goes in, I got to be there. By hook or by crook, if I have to crawl. If I don't have legs, I will crawl. I will pull myself and will myself to get to Canton, Ohio to see him do his induction. I wonder if he even has a speech. The guy's so soft-spoken and really how many times do you remember Polamalu ever talking? Like really, like a couple interviews, and how short are they and real composed and everything like that. It would be really interesting to see a speech. What it would be, like 2 minutes long, you know what I mean? But I think you'll have like a long, like Oscar type list of people to thank.
Yeah, I have not yet, and this may surprise some people, I have not yet made it to a Hall of Fame induction. I wanted to go to Bettis's, but work prevented me from doing so. I was in Texas at the time, and there's just no way to do it. But as you said, when Troy goes in, there's really no option for me. It may even be, if the wife says no, I may go, well, look, you're not going to see me for a couple days.
Yeah.
And I'll see you when I get back. And if you've decided to lock the doors and throw all my crap on the lawn, so be it.
Yeah, basically, it's I'm in the same situation. We could just we could maybe find a flop house or something in Canton, and you and I can share a queen bed or something.
There you go.
In someone's basement or attic or whatever. So, I jumped over to defensive player immediately. That was second. It was offensive and defensive player were our first two choices, and Troy's my guy. I mean, he's total package. I mean, come on. First round pick. Here's a guy who hit no pun intended here. We're talking about Bettis, but hit like a bus himself. How many times was he a game changer, a playmaker? And I think the biggest thing with Troy was he made the impossible look easy. And even though we know he was probably unhappy with the way his career had finished in Pittsburgh, you don't hear him complain about it. He's not Mr. Big Checks, you know what I mean? And, you'd always see him, praying or, signing the cross or whatever. I mean, it wasn't to the Tebow level, but I think people knew he was highly religious and, he was larger than life, but yet he wasn't. It's kind of strange like that. But I think the biggest thing people take away from Polamalu, did he really kind of start the hair sticking out from underneath the helmet out onto your jersey kind of thing? It's really one of the first guys I can remember like that. I know there are others, but I mean, it was just so almost everyone either had it like tucked up underneath their helmet with a bandana or something like that, or just had like a short haircut. And now you don't think anything of it now these days when you see a player with, dreads or longer, flowing hair sliding out. And even to the point where there's rules about if you end up like tackling somebody by their hair and pulling it out. I forget who it was that was holding it there like a Mortal Kombat fatality up there, like they had a prize, you know what I mean? Like the Predator, there's another one for anybody who doesn't follow video games. If you follow movies and never seen the Predator and they kind of hold their trophy or whatever in their hand, it was the craziest type of thing. And I think Troy really started with that, and I feel he's one of the greatest of all time. There's no reason he shouldn't be a first ballot Hall of Famer. I really hate comparisons with some other players. I saw one that was like greatest safety, and it was like Ed Reed, Ronnie Lott, and somebody else. They didn't even include Polamalu as one of the three choices, with building your all-time defense. It was like something like that where it was from different eras. I think another one was like Reggie White, Bruce Smith, and Strahan maybe. And it was just like, Troy belongs here. But really, I don't get into comparisons because I believe he and Ed Reed were different types of players. Yeah, but absolutely. I mean, I couldn't go with anybody else on defense, Brian. Did you have somebody different that you could have possibly went with in a Heinz Field era other than Troy Polamalu? Because for me, it'd be impossible. The only way I'd be able to do this is if we had exclusions to this list, and then it would have made it a little less fun. Yeah, I actually picked Troy as well. There was I thought about it a long time. Big Snack gets on my list for, a possible thing because as I've talked about, and we've talked about it in the back rooms, in my mind, Casey Hampton is a Hall of Fame caliber player because of what he did, but he'll never get into the Hall of Fame because he doesn't have stats, because he played in a Dick LeBeau defense that did not promote statistical achievement for the defensive lineman. Same thing is true of Aaron Smith. In my mind, Aaron Smith is one of the greatest 3-4 defensive ends to ever have played the game, which would conceivably make him a potential Hall of Famer. But he's never going to get the notoriety because he was, limited in what he was allowed to do, but he filled those roles. And same thing's true of Casey Hampton. I thought about those two guys. I thought about Potsy because, James Ferrier was the heart and soul or the mind of that defense for Dick LeBeau. He was Dick LeBeau on the field for them. And he was a fantastic interior linebacker. But even when you look at all that, it's got to be Troy. Yeah. It's got to be. It's not. And I thought about all this, but when you come down to it, it's not even close.
There is no more. And people will be mad I left Debo off, but it's okay.
Well, in what kind of hurts that with Debo, obviously, is it's tough.
He left.
Well, he left, and the way he left kind of hurts it. And I know it's already it's business. You could tell, because otherwise he would have stayed away the way Troy has stayed away. Where I think Troy's is a little more personal than business.
Yes.
But then again, if Troy would have been allowed to play another year or two as he had wished, would he have phased out like Heinz Ward kind of sitting on the bench or something like that, not as involved? And would it really be any different? I think he would just kind of fade into his own privacy.
Yeah, I think Troy's the end of the Troy Polamalu era was not how Troy wanted it to be, but it is similar to how it was for a lot of players as they age. They think they've got a couple more years. The Steelers tend to disagree, or even if they are willing to do it, they're going to want to do it at a much reduced number, and Troy wasn't willing to do any of those things. But he still handled it like a professional and just said, okay, fine. He's a Steeler for life. He's never put on any other uniform. And, Troy was special. Like I said, we've I guess coined the grown-ass man phrase with Cam Hayward, and Cam is a grown-ass man, but Troy, as I said, Troy was a grown-ass man before anybody ever thought of calling him that.
Yeah.
Look, there's the highlight reel interceptions, that the one against Phillip Rivers where he literally uses his fingertips to get the ball before it hits the turf. Skying up, because Troy was not overly tall, skying up to pick off another pass, towards the end zone against, I think it was the Titans. And, there's just all those things, jumping over the defensive line. You never see anybody do that before.
And he nearly did it twice. The one was not timed as well as the Kerry Collins one is weird because it's not even technically called a sack. I think it's a run for no gain because the ball, I don't even know, left the line of scrimmage. Yeah. It got snapped in Troy. They were on the 1 yard line. I think I just had this on up on the website for one of the Throwback Thursdays that I do. And it's so easy to pick the Throwback Thursday. It's so easy to just pick Troy Polamalu plays. You could do 24 of them. There's so many of them. And you're saying that, and that's what I was meaning earlier by he made the impossible look easy. And anytime the ball was in his hands, was there any doubt that you would think he may take it to the house? No. And he did. Even late in his career, there was one. I'm trying to think who it was playing at home. It could have been so many different teams. It was one of the 8-8 seasons, obviously. Maybe they were playing the Lions or the Dolphins or somebody like that. And it could even been Cleveland I just don't remember who it was. But I just remember, him kind of shuffling right into the corner of the end zone where we were sitting. He took it the whole way, and he kind of held the ball right up almost helmet face mask level as he was crossing the goal line. So the last guy making his last ditch defensive effort didn't even punch or hit the ball out. I mean, that's just how great he was. And I don't know, man. I mean, it's just I would like to see him come around and be part of some of these things, like when they bring a Super Bowl 40 team back or the 43 team back, and they do some of the alumni things. And definitely, is Troy in the? I don't know that he's part of the Hall of Honor yet either, right?
Oh no, not yet. I don't believe so.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, more than deserving, and will come, but I believe that's probably something where they all have I think they have kind of a bust or something that's there. And they probably need him to show, and they kind of probably want to make a media appearance thing out of it. They're not. I don't know that they necessarily want to put somebody in who can't show unless it's posthumously, where someone's deceased or something like that.
I think for someone like Troy, who is an inevitable Hall of Fame player, and as you said, should be a first ballot Hall of Famer. I think that the likelihood of them waiting to allow that honor to come first makes sense because he's eligible. He could go into the Hall of Honor. Is he deserving to be in the Hall of Honor? Of course he is. But let him get into the Hall of Fame first and have that as his last sort of signature all over the place moment, and maybe that'll help heal some wounds. We'll see what happens, and how badly that relationship may or may not have been fractured. It's really upsetting that it got to that point, because I think he is one of the most beloved players in Steelers lore, and it'll be, as you said, it would be really nice to be able to have him come back to the stadium, have him involved in some of the things that they do around ex-players, alumni players, and just be able to see him around and involved. But I think the thing about Troy is, I don't know that even if it had ended in the most wonderful way possible, you always kind of felt when Troy was done, he was just gonna fade away.
Yeah.
He was like, I'm done the spotlight. I've done my thing. Lambert is very similar to that, and he'll show up for some signings every now and then. But he doesn't show up at the stadium very often.
No.
For any of those reunion type things. It's very similar. It's like, I did my thing and now I'm done. So, it's not terribly surprising, but yeah, it would be nice to be able to appreciate what he did in front of him again. And I guess, we'll get our chance when he gets into the hall.
That's an interesting point too, because Bradshaw is Terry Bradshaw is somebody like that too, but I think a lot of his has to deal with obligations to his job and the other things he does as like an analyst and studio guy and part-time actor here or there too. But even in that regard, Terry Bradshaw has surprised me, even with how critical he has been of the franchise or Mike Tomlin or other guys, throughout the especially recent years or over the years. He seems like he almost seems like you, Brian, the disgruntled guy that says, "Get off my lawn." But Terry even recorded like a film thing, and I think Cowher did the same thing for some of these things that they do at the stadium at halftime and ceremonies and whatnot. And let's not forget, there were a whole lot of people who didn't necessarily. Some people got in last year as opposed. There wasn't as many last year. The first wave was pretty much, if you're in the Hall of Fame, you're in the Hall of Honor. Then it was a very small class last year. Rocky Blyer, Buddy Dial, Alan Faneca is the one that I wanted to bring up here because he's not in the Hall yet, and he's always of discussion. But that may take some time because it's just nobody wants to put offensive guards, and he's got some guys that are on par with. I still think he's just a nudge above some of these guys as far as getting in first, but there's about 5 guys there that are, was it Kevin Mawai and some other guys that are very good offensive linemen that are Hall of Fame worthy, and they're only going to put like one in here or there, especially when you got a large class of like flashy superstar types like wide receivers and stuff. I mean, come on, like, you know what I mean? You put T.O. in or something like that, you know what I mean? So, yep. But it's a very good point that Lambert, Bradshaw to some degree, they don't have the visibility of Franco Harris or Mel Blount or Mean Joe Green that are always around, and they still come back and they all hang out for some of these things. And Lynn Swann to some degree, Swanee used to go, he used to be a sideline analyst in that, and you used to see him a lot, and now you don't see him as much, but he's still around and still accessible. So, yeah, definitely with Troy. Let's move on to our next. Let's go to the offense. And I kind of had the same thing, even though it's a current player. I couldn't go without doing Ben Roethlisberger here. I mean, since Ben started, I remember how hard it was to get his jersey when he was, a rookie. And during that whole thing, with Bettis and we're going to win one for you and everything like that. We talked about this numerous times on other recent podcasts about all of the players who have benefited from Ben Roethlisberger being a quarterback, and even the coaches too. I mean, let's not kid ourselves here when we're talking about, Ben being deserving of contracts and this and that. There are guys, there's recent guys, obviously, the names, the elephants in the room, Brown and Bell, that made a lot of money by being able to play with the Steelers and being able to play with Ben Roethlisberger. Ben Roethlisberger has never had a losing season as a quarterback, and we talked about what kind of respect or disrespected he does or doesn't get, but let's face it, Bill Cowher wins a Super Bowl with Ben Roethlisberger as his quarterback. Mike Tomlin wins a Super Bowl and goes to another one with Ben Roethlisberger as his quarterback. I don't know necessarily. Does Cowher ever get over the hump if he's still trying to put like Cordell Stewart out there, Tommy Maddox? Maybe. I'm not going to discredit Cowher as a good coach. I'm not going to discredit Tomlin as a good coach either, because we've seen when he's had to play, Charlie Batch, Byron Leftwich, Landry Jones. I mean, that one's kind of an exception. I think he could win a lot of games if Landry Jones was the starter. But, he's still gotten it done too. But this whole organization, man, I mean, there's always the arguments about Bradshaw versus Roethlisberger, and they're different eras. And do the 70s Steelers teams win without Bradshaw? Possibly. I don't know. But, the more recent teams, this Heinz Field era, the Steelers aren't the Steelers without Ben Roethlisberger.
I can't. I'll tell you who I picked because it wasn't Ben, but I can't really argue with your pick. Ben has essentially owned the Heinz Field era. I mean, he came in 2 years after Heinz Field opened.
Yeah.
And that field, other than a couple years with Tommy Maddox and a little Cordell mixed in, hasn't known any other player other than Ben Roethlisberger really as the starting quarterback for the Steelers. And you're absolutely right. He's provided a lot of great moments. I was there at the Joe Green retirement game. I'm sure you were, as well, against the Ravens. And he throws 6 touchdowns. The second game in a row where he throws 6 touchdowns. Just a lot of moments like that with Ben that it still boggles my mind, the lack of respect. And I know we just did a whole show about it, but so I won't go on and on. It just flabbergasts me. Because he's done things that no other quarterback in the history of the league has ever done. And he is definitely a different type of quarterback. And when he does finally hang it up, we will miss him. And hopefully, he's had a different career than Bradshaw did, without a doubt, because Ben has gone through a little bit of that love-hate kind of thing where, he was embraced beyond embrace because he was the savior. I mean, remember, we were all like, oh my God, we got to get a quarterback.
Yeah.
And Ben came in and he was the savior when he was drafted, and the team, goes 15-1, and then the people are just totally in love with him.
Yes.
And yes, he's had some issues. Yeah. Let's just put it that way.
Well, I was going to mention that. I was going to mention that actually, just before you get to your guy. My first experience at Heinz Field, believe it or not, because I was a starving college kid. Okay, I couldn't afford to go to games, so I go to my first game in 2010, and as frequent listeners of the show know, my wife is a Browns fan. And so the Steelers and Browns are playing each other, 2010. It's the first game that Ben Roethlisberger comes back off of that suspension, which kind of tarnished maybe that love for Ben Roethlisberger. And I'm never going to forget it because they wore the 75th anniversary jerseys they had, the ones with like the gold block numbers and the gold stripes. They're almost very, very similar to the Color Rush jerseys they have now, but they had the yellow helmets with the white pants. And they play the Browns, and they just smacked them like 28-10, and that was after a bye week. So you had to wait 4 weeks from that suspension for Ben to come back, and then another week because they were on bye for week 5. So it was a week 6 game, and it was into October, and it was just a gorgeous day in great weather. And there's just so many great memories of Ben Roethlisberger too. Some of those are tied to Antonio Brown, obviously, immaculate extension, or we were talking about the fake snap play against the Cowboys, which would be an even greater lore had they won that game. So. Sorry to cut you off and interrupt there, Brian, but I just, you were getting to that point, and I wanted to bring that up as just, that's one of the reasons why Ben is my favorite offensive player.
Yep. And so I'm going to wrap it up there because I'll move on to who I picked. And I mentioned Bettis earlier. I wanted this to be Jerome Bettis because Bettis is one of my all-time favorites. I really wanted to pick Bettis, and I just finally decided that I couldn't because, for no better reason than he really only had maybe 3 seasons at Heinz.
Yeah.
And I just thought, I love him, but do I love him as the offensive player of the Heinz Field era? I don't know.
Yeah, I couldn't do it either, unfortunately.
I wanted to, and I couldn't. I thought about Ben. I thought a lot about Ben. And Ben also possesses some of the traits that I love in football players: his toughness. Going in after Haloti Ngata breaks his nose, continuing to playing through injury, having that kind of a linebacker mentality to a certain extent as the quarterback. But there's another guy,
yeah,
who has that linebacker mentality at an offensive position, who fits my nickname that we talked about the other day. And we didn't mention him when we mentioned this, but Philip Rivers remembers. Or not Philip. What was his? Derek Rivers. I can't remember his name.
Wait, what?
Somebody named Rivers.
The old man down by the river?
Yeah, the old man down by the river remembers what guy named Rivers, Heinz Ward, broke his jaw. And
I'm going to look this up because I'm drawing a freaking blank too, and I could picture the play. I could picture it perfectly.
Yeah. He's got a rule. It's like there's the Mel Blount rule. There's the crackback block Heinz Ward rule. And this is, again...
Keith Rivers.
Keith Rivers.
Yes.
Okay, I knew Rivers. I couldn't remember the rest.
I couldn't remember that either for some reason.
Yeah.
We're getting old. That was back in 2008. So.
Yeah, and I guess the reason really is after that the guy was nothing.
Yeah.
Heinz, like, first start with the smile. I mean, you just know there's very few other guys. I mean, Antonio Brown had a smile, but Heinz's smile was just a thing of beauty. You knew it, and it was the best part about it is there was a little bump you in that smile.
Yeah, exactly.
There was a little arrogance in that smile and a little hint and a little wink of saying, ha, 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 ha. Nelson from The Simpsons, ha, ha. There was that in the smile. But the fact that, here's a guy who was a quarterback in college. He gets converted to wide receiver. And when he starts getting playing time, you could not help but notice him because whatever was thrown near him, he caught. Didn't matter. He's going to get hammered 16 times over the middle. He gets popped. The ball never comes out. Heinz Ward, it felt like, his skin exuded stickum, even though it was illegal, because he just didn't drop balls.
Hey, speaking of that, when we were talking about Madden and playing, when I did play with the Steelers back in the day, third down, always find the route that Heinz Ward is running, and you never go wrong for many years there. Yeah, definitely. I mean, they at least gave him some love there. Never dropped the ball.
Never dropped the ball, and he was. This is why I feel like Heinz Ward deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. There has never been a better blocking receiver than Heinz Ward in my mind. Heinz Ward was punishing. Heinz Ward scared defensive players. He frightened them. They so much so that they voted him as the dirtiest player in the league, and he wasn't dirty. It's just that if he could play within the rules and knock your block off, he was gonna.
Yeah.
He took as much joy in dropping a guy from a block as he did in scoring a touchdown. And I took as much joy in watching him do that as I did in watching him score a touchdown. To me, Heinz will always be one of the top Steelers receivers in history and will probably always settle in right behind John Stallworth as my second favorite receiver of all time. But he's clearly my favorite receiver of the Heinz Field era. And just the way he went about things and how he handled his business, and the fact that he just gave 110% all the time, I ended up going with Heinz. It was close. It was a toss-up between Ben and Heinz. And I went with Heinz because because he broke a guy's jaw.
Have you had the opportunity to meet Heinz? Because I was pretty geeked up for that one. There's very few players like, we're in a quasi media type role here where we do get to meet players, and I don't usually, get all the warms and fuzzies, but Rod Woodson practically made me weak in the knees like a little girl. And at least that's the way I felt. And then Heinz Ward had that effect on me too, man. I mean, I absolutely love him. And I'm sure if I was around Troy, I'd be like, because there's some guys that like walk around. It's like, hey, they're larger than life. And we've talked about this with some of the players coming into the league sometimes. And they don't want to out themselves as being like a fanboy or anything like that. But when now all of a sudden this is like your coworker, you know what I mean? And it's just, wow, okay, I get to be around like these kind of people. And when I got to meet Heinz, even though it was for like a brief few minutes and ask a question or two, it was just wow, it was really surreal. So it's one of those things. I think it's just because I was a little bit younger and never foresaw myself in this type of role before, you know what I mean? Because, you get guys like Ron Cook that are like, why do people even wear jerseys? Why would you ever have somebody's name on your back? And it's like, well, my closet is still half full of Big Ben and Troy Polamalu, and I do have a signed Heinz Ward. I had to get my Heinz Ward jersey autographed by him as well. And, I'm not ashamed to say that. I know you have a ton of memorabilia yourself, Brian. Myself, you know me. It's like it has to be something above and beyond or special or have some type of gimmick or quirk to it, like the football I have signed by several kickers for the Steelers. For me to go and do something like that, for me, I'm not bothering somebody out to eat and asking them to sign a napkin or something that has like no value and also kind of teeing them off while they're out with their families. That's just never been my style, and I have like a modicum of professionalism and respect for that type of thing. But there are times too where I'm just kind of like, whoa, did that just happen? And Heinz Ward was one of those moments for me as well. And getting back to, let me see, where are we at here? We're on the third topic here, where we had to pick a non-player. So it could be anybody within the Steelers organization. It could be a coach. It could be anybody. And I went with a former player who didn't play at Heinz Field, but was also a broadcaster. And this was tough for me because, I love Myron Cope. And seeing the thing we do here, we do the podcast, we talk into a microphone. I have a tremendous amount of respect for, broadcasters. I believe they bring, for the most part, if it's Chris Collinsworth, he doesn't have the same level of respect for me. So, but there's some guys where I'm just like, they're completely dumb. And then there's guys where I really respect them, their opinion, their work and stuff like that. And Myron Cope will forever, ever hold a special place in my heart. And, back when I couldn't necessarily watch every game on TV because, didn't have Sunday Ticket or, I didn't even have cable TV when I was younger. The radio was my escape, and Myron Cope was a lot of that escape. But I will still find myself listening to games on the radio, maybe even simultaneously while they're on TV. Or I haven't gone this far actually, but I brought it up on the app a couple times within the stadium, but it's kind of spotty because of the internet, the Wi-Fi, or your cell connection, because there's so many darn people at Heinz Field for a game. But I've seen people wear like the radio headsets and stuff. The only problem with radio versus TV is if there's a delay, especially if you're like a streamer, the Roku, Amazon Fire Stick thing I was talking about earlier. Those sometimes you're like a play or two behind. So if you're listening on the radio is like you're there live, and it's like listening to spoilers. And these guys paint a picture. They're the Bob Ross audio version. There's a squirrel. There's a pretty squirrel. Well, for my guy here, a non-player, I went with Tunch Ilkin, and which is kind of surprising because, when we had the opportunity to interview him, I did not move heaven and earth because I had just so many different things going on. I could not interview him, and I still kicked myself about that. You got the opportunity to do that and speak to him. But, I've met and spoke to him several times other than that, and he's a friend of ours here at Steel City Underground for the most part. Very busy guy, still involved with everything with the organization aside from broadcasting. He does a lot of the Steelers.com things, and, he's just such a great down-to-earth guy. You talk to him and you feel like, oh my God, I've known Tunch for, it feels like you've known him for 20 years.
Absolutely.
And I would say he's the kind of guy you could go sit down at a bar and have a drink with, but he's dry. He doesn't drink, and he hasn't for maybe as long as his life. I don't know. But he's clean. He's straight edge as far as that's concerned. So I don't want to misrepresent him there, but it's kind of the guy that would sit there like an episode of Cheers, maybe just having a glass of water that you would feel like, hey, you're at home with Tunch Ilkin and taking over for Myron Cope. I remember when they first added Tunch to the booth and it was the 3-man thing, and Myron was still around a little bit in the Heinz Field era, but I'm going to remember Tunch because now it's been such a long time and such a long experience here with Tunch Ilkin being the color guy, because Bill Hillgrove's been doing this for 80 years or something. He'll live in infamy, and he was around for Three Rivers also. So I wanted to go with a guy, and I wanted to go somebody that was a non-player, and I kind of wanted to go away from a coach because there's so many coaches that I could have put here, but I didn't want to disparage anyone, and I wanted to be a little bit different. And of course, this is just me and Brian talking about this, but when you go back to all of our contributors here with SCU, when we're doing this for the website, I kind of wanted to think outside the box from everyone else. So Tunch was my pick.
Yeah, and you mentioned that interview, which is one of the greatest pleasures I've had doing this so far. It was the interview with Tunch Ilkin, because it's, as you said, he makes you feel like you've known him since birth. Yeah. He's been your best buddy since the day you were born. And he's so personable. He's so down to earth. And if you haven't listened to the interview that we have on the channel, I encourage you to do it. He's got great stories. It's well worth the time to listen to because he's a font of Steelers lore, and he just tells some great tales. And I think it's a great pick. On your part. I did not go that route. And what I decided was the guy I picked, I met twice. And I'm a guy that I don't get too excited, too high, too low, too bent out of shape about much of anything that goes on with people I don't actually know personally. Right? Mm-hmm. My daughter, we've come to call my daughter the town crier. And the reason we call her the town crier is because as soon as anyone famous in the world passes on, she runs down the stairs and rings the bell. News! Eddie Jones is dead. And and she looks at me and wants me to be upset about it. And I'm not, because I don't know these people. And while I feel bad, in the sense I have empathy for their families, and it's always unfortunate when somebody passes away before their time, it never hits me. I'm never like sitting there going, ugh, wow, that bothers me. But when Dan Rooney passed away,
yeah,
I wept. I don't know. I didn't know Dan Rooney. Dan Rooney probably would never have remembered me, but I met him twice. And again, his persona, and if you haven't read his book, 75 Years in the NFL with Steelers, read it. You'll get a sense of the man and who he was. I put this in the article piece. It's just as simple. In my mind, he's the greatest owner ever. Period. Move on. I don't care what era. I know he was around for all of obviously Three Rivers, but still, I can't get past Dan Rooney, even in the Heinz Field era, as a person that goes on my list. I just couldn't get beyond it. And I thought about a lot of, again, it was much like the Troy thing. I thought about Dick LeBeau. I thought about Tomlin. I thought about, a bunch of different names that were non-players or non-players in that, because obviously Tunch was a player, but non-players in this spectrum. I thought about Wolfley. I thought about Tunch. I thought about Hargrove. I mean, there was a lot of people that I thought about, and I kept going, but Dan Rooney. And that was it. I was done. For me, it wasn't even close. So that was my pick.
No, I think that's a tremendous pick. Who could disagree with that? Really, who could argue it? No one. So
no,
I mean, it makes perfect sense to me. And I thought about Coach Dad too, to be completely honest.
Yeah.
And we still have another category coming up where somebody like that could have fit in, but players almost overwhelmingly kind of, do it for me. Coach Dad was interesting because, he was around with Cowher and with Tomlin, and he's definitely, if you don't know who I'm talking about, Dick LeBeau is Coach Dad. But he's another guy that's just like, timeless for just about any era of Steelers you could think about, or NFL for that matter. He's been around 40 plus years. I mean, it's just incredible. But I was trying to really stick to a specific era here. And when we get into this next topic, it's the player that never made a Pro Bowl. And this was the one that was very difficult because, like you said, you were looking at Potsy, and I was like, did Potsy make a Pro Bowl? Yeah, he made one. Did Diesel make one? Brett Kiesel? Yeah, he's been in a Pro Bowl or two also. Heath Miller also, and obviously you can't pick guys like Ben or Troy or Heinz Ward or, Cordell Stewart. Even in that matter, as much as I loved Cordell Stewart, he's still kind of a pre-Heinz, he had that 1 year or whatever, and it was that the one that ended in the bad AFC Championship game, or was that just the total flop of a season? I'm getting them mixed up here.
Yeah, I think it was.
You know what? I have it here. 10-5, 2002. Well, that was Maddox. I'm sorry. So 2001. But you know what? He lost his job when he came to Heinz Field.
Right.
That's what happened. So anyways, yeah, I'm like, who do you put in here? I mean, I can't even put like Roosevelt Nix because Roosevelt Nix made a Pro Bowl. I can't put Chris Boswell, and especially after the season he had last year, he doesn't really fall into there. But I did end up going with a kicker, believe it or not. This is someone that I really enjoyed watching play, and I wonder what may have happened if he got to play a little longer. We kind of joked about some of these things with kickers. They play until they're 60 years old. He would be, 37 right now if he were still playing. He had that tragic injury in the Hall of Fame game. I went with Sean Sweesham. And, I'm a sucker for guys like, Landry Jones. Tongue-in-cheek, Landry Jones is still a favorite of mine. But I have to say that Sean Sweesham was somebody, I just have like this thing for kickers. And, I like Jeff Reed too. And, Jeff Reed has a ring and everything like that as well. And it was really tough for me. That would have been maybe a very biased pick because, Jeff Reed's another guy that's a friend of ours too.
Yeah.
And, another guy that's very down to, believe it or not, down to earth. I know a lot of people think of him as just crazy from some of the stories that are out there. Down to earth, one of the most friendly guys you'll ever get to talk to if you happen to bump into Jeff Reed. I imagine he would give you the shirt off his back just like Tunch Ilkin would. Sweesham's a guy that still has a lot of visibility and, out in the community and everything like that. So I had to go with a player that never made a Pro Bowl. So I had to go with Sweesham. I don't know that I can't say that I didn't have any other choice because, well, I'll let you say your choice, and then we can name a few others that didn't make a Pro Bowl that some of the other folks picked.
Yeah, I went, and I'm looking at his jersey on my wall right now. It's a Bumblebee jersey, and it has the most ironic photo in the frame of an interception in the Super Bowl. And the reason that it's ironic is because it's Ike Taylor.
Mm-hmm. I know, man.
And hands of stone, Ike Taylor. Ike was, he's this guy from a small school, a middle round pick, and Ike turned into one of the best cover corners that we've seen. The problem was he could not catch the ball. How many times he dropped interceptions and caused us to pull our hair out. But, for years, when Ike was at the top of his game, you put him on the best receiver on the other team, and he disappeared. It was just, he was done. And you couldn't help but love other parts of Ike. How much did I love watching Monday Night Football? For no better reason than when Ike would come on and go swaggin'.
Yeah.
As the university he went to, swaggin'. And it's just, Ike was that kind of guy. And he's a guy I wish that we could talk to, because I think I've heard him on like Barstool and a couple other places, and he tells, again, much like Tunch, he tells great stories. And Ike just seems like the kind of guy who's a down-to-earth kind of guy. I was sad when his skill set started to drop off and he just didn't have the wheels to do it anymore. But, you talk about the guys that were there that never made a Pro Bowl, and to me, the one that stands out as maybe should have and certainly would have would be a much different conversation if he caught half the passes he dropped.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, he would be, no doubt, he would be, thought of a lot high. A lot of people ragged on him. And that's basically the only reason, right? I mean,
yeah.
Otherwise, why wouldn't we put, we're going to get flamed on. I'm going to get flamed on for this. This is somewhat of a sizzling take maybe, but you think if Ike Taylor catches the balls thrown his way, he's in the same conversation as like a younger Richard Sherman? I mean, I don't know it's that far-fetched, to be completely honest. Although, I will say, his career didn't necessarily start off that way, so he wasn't out the gate like a lockdown guy.
Absolutely.
But he had maybe three really solid seasons, maybe 4, where he was like, one of the most dependable corner on the team. Yeah, I mean, it was tough. And I mean, some of the names that we had that came up, Antoine Randall L., was one of them. Ramon Foster, another one. But I mean, you couldn't. I mean, some of the guys that are just favorites that we've mentioned, you can't put like James Harrison on that, or Heinz Ward, or who else am I thinking of here? I'm starting to draw blanks. But there's several names. I know. Well, our last topic here, we may as well just throw it out. It's the person not listed above. And mine was already spoken about, so I won't go into length since I've already shared some of my stories. But it was Heinz Ward. Definitely one of my favorite guys. So just to review, my offensive player was Big Ben. My defensive player was Troy. My non-player was Tunch Ilkin. My player that didn't make a Pro Bowl was Sean Swayzem. And I said person not listed above because I left it open to, once again, anyone in the organization, player or otherwise. But I picked Heinz Ward as my fifth of the Heinz Field era. I almost said the Heinz Ward era, which almost it is.
Kind of was.
Yeah,
kind of was.
Pretty much except for present day, of course.
And I hinted at my guy too, but I didn't go into quite as great a detail. But the guy that I picked as person not listed above was Aaron Smith. If there was other than Troy, if there was a grown-ass man before Cam Hayward, it was Aaron Smith. Matter of fact, he kind of took over for Aaron Smith. And Aaron Smith is one of my all-time favorite players in the history of the team. When I used to collect cards, and I don't anymore because I think the card industry has gotten ridiculous.
Jeez, yeah.
But the card that was my most, I mean, I had Troy Polamalu autographed rookie cards. I had all kinds of stuff, right? Stuff that was very high ticket cards. I had if you collect cards, you'll know what I'm talking about here. I had a Ben Roethlisberger 2004 SPA. It's a $1,200 card. I mean, I had cards that were very highly sought, but the one that I cared about the most was my Aaron Smith rookie card from this little teeny collection of cards. I had it graded. It was like when I finally dumped my collection, it was the one that I didn't sell right away. I didn't get rid of it, and I kept it, and I finally got rid of it because I knew it was going to draw me back in and suck me back into collecting, and I didn't want to do it. But it's just because of the guy he was. I mean, I have Aaron Smith memorabilia here because he did his job more than well. He was in a position in the Dick LeBeau defense where he was asked to eat up blocks and allow the outside linebackers to make plays, and he did it. And he made plays too. At the same time, he was awesome against the run. And if he had been allowed to be aggressive in pass rush, we might be talking about Aaron Smith as a potential Hall of Famer. And people are going to laugh, but go back and watch the guy play. He was that good. He was that effective and great in his role, and he was just limited by what he was allowed to do within the defense within which he played. But without guys like Aaron Smith and Casey Hampton and Brett Kiesel, the guys like Lamar Woodley and James Harrison don't have the numbers that they had. Those defenses aren't as good, as anywhere near as good as they were. This is the heart of those defenses right here, and that was Aaron Smith to me.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we talk about this quite a bit where a lot of people are forgetting how many pieces the Steelers had to replace on those great defenses, the Super Bowl ones. I mean, transitioning from with Cowher over to Tomlin, some of those pieces, Larry Foote got some time in there, Ferrier somewhere in between there. I mean, you had Clark Hagen's go away, Joey Porter go away, but you had James Harrison, and Lamar Woodley comes along, Lawrence Timmons comes along. So there's different era players there, but one that never sufficiently was replaced. And I mean, I know Brett Kiesel got to kind of fill in that time, and Cam Hayward eventually came along. Ziggy Hood was meant to be drafted to be kind of that guy, but they never anticipated Aaron Smith having the health issues and walking away. And at the same time, you had players who got older or kind of faded. James Harrison ended up leaving the team for a spell there, and then came out. He was going into retirement. Troy Polamalu we already talked about, and Lamar Woodley we mentioned on maybe sometime recently on one of these shows, and how he got hurt. He was like lightning in a bottle, and then all of a sudden it all hit at once. Casey Hampton retires. There was just so many. Ferrier retires. Larry Foote, I know he left and came back at some point too, but I mean you had didn't Larry Foote get hurt one of those seasons too? He was meant to be the inside guy. Wasn't that the year that Vince Williams was a rookie? I believe it was Foote that got hurt in the first. That first game was so bad. It was Pouncey and Foote, and I think Rod Stevens-Howling, who came in, he was going to be kind of like a scat back, change of pace guy, and he didn't even play but like a couple snaps. He was involved in the first series, and then he was done for the year. And going back on that, it's just like, wow. I mean, Aaron Smith was definitely one of those fixtures, and he was a perennial Pro Bowl type of guy. Speaking of which, Vince Williams was one of the picks for the non-Pro Bowl guy. Derek Overly picked him. Terry picked Ramon Foster as hers, and I'm trying to think. Antoine Randall L made an appearance in here, but one of the ones that was very interesting. There's a couple interesting ones actually. The professor went with guys that just like block or try and shed blocks for all of his picks, and he went with Dan Kreider, the former fullback, and I mean there was somebody that a hard-nosed player that you blast from the past you kind of forget about. But who didn't make a Pro Bowl? That's a very high-profile player, and he's ingrained now in an organization, or at least into all these festivities and events. And we've mentioned him as one of the guys that got replaced in the past. That was a star receiver. That's Santonio Holmes. Was never a Pro Bowler ever.
Yeah.
And he is a Super Bowl MVP. And he gets to show up and be in all the photo ops and everything like that when they invite the MVPs back, and has probably one of the most famous plays. It's hard to say because the Steelers have a lot of legendary plays and players, which we've gone through here. And Holmes is up there with him when it comes to the Super Bowl type plays. So it almost seems like so's James Harrison. It almost seems like blasphemy to not throw him in here, but I couldn't pick him over Troy and as another player. And for years I loved Harrison too. So I mean, there's a couple honorable mentions as far as guys that I really wanted to put in here. Then there's Noah Freeman, who's been on the show a few times, and he's an Indiana University guy. I didn't even know they had football. But Noah's gonna hate.
Do they? I'm not sure. I don't remember.
Noah's gonna hate that. But he picked Randall L twice as his non-Pro Bowl guy and his offensive player. So I think we know who his guy is. So these were all great picks, and it really makes you think. So folks, if you're out there and you're thinking about this and you want to add some in the comments or shoot us a message, we may even go back and just do a show talking about everybody else's picks here. The way we structured this was our 5 Heinz Field era players. Try saying that 3 times fast. So they have to be somebody as far as the criteria of offensive player, defensive player, a non-player, a player that never made a Pro Bowl, which you're going to find when you start researching. Man, it is really tough. And then of course, one of the person that you probably really, really, really liked, and they were one of your favorites, but you didn't get to pick them in the first 4. It gets to be kind of your wild card pick. So I'm curious, Brian, to see some of the ones that maybe some other folks come up with.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see in the comments what we get. I feel like I'm having one of those old man yells at cloud moments, and it's brought on by you mentioning Santonio Holmes, and I have to do it because you mentioned Santonio Holmes, so I have to do it. And Trey Essex sparked this in me again the other day. He tweeted out that last pass, and he said, "Sure, the catch is great, catch is fantastic, but the pass, that ball had to be that in that exact spot, couldn't be anywhere else." And deliver, and he did. And the thing is, it wasn't the first pass that he threw that was like that, because remember, Holmes dropped the one the play before.
Yeah.
That would have been the same kind of a thing. So I love Holmes. I mean, I love Tone. He was an Ohio State guy. How could we not love him, right? But this is my old man moment. Ben Roethlisberger should have been the MVP of that damn game. And that's just all there is to it. It annoys me. It annoys me even to this day.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's just because of, if he doesn't put the ball there, then Holmes isn't the MVP either. I mean, it's just
right.
Yeah, I know. That always doesn't it seem. That seems like the reason why maybe Ben doesn't get the love that we think he deserves, because he's one of the quarterbacks of this era that is not a Super Bowl MVP. I mean, it's unfortunate, but it's Heinz Ward and Santonio Holmes. I mean, that's just crazy to me. Like, the guy throwing the ball to these guys, you know what I mean? It's just, I don't know. It's almost like if you had a game that was completely defensive, and then you end up picking a special teamer, which did happen. Wasn't that Desmond Howard? Back with the Packers ages ago, they had like a return in the Super Bowl for a TD, and I think he's still only the only MVP that has been a special teamer up at this point. So, yeah, I mean, I can't disagree with any of it. I mean, Brady didn't win the MVP for all of his Super Bowls either. I mean, they gave the one to Deion Branch, so I guess it kind of falls into that same category. But he has a number of other ones, and of course, Julian Edelman threw up in my mouth. Sorry. Yeah, I know. It makes me convulse to say the name. So it's wild to me just to think, maybe this is part of Ben's mission. Maybe he'll get there, and then maybe he'll be recognized as such. It almost seems just the same way that James Harrison having that the guys who have these big plays, it's like they become the MVP, but then there's the guys who had the big plays that didn't. And I don't know. It's just, how many does Montana have? Montana has 3 of the 4. So Jerry Rice had the 1. So I guess it works that way sometimes. And, you even look at, Drew Brees has 1, Peyton Manning has 1, Eli Manning has 1, Eli Manning has 2, Joe Flacco has, that's so disappointing. Vomit. I mean, Nick Foles, and we're talking that Ben doesn't have an MVP, but oh well. Not to stray the course from this. We still want to hear your favorite Heinz Field era players. So join us in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe as well. And Brian, any closing thoughts aside from we tell everyone to be safe, be good, and whatnot, but I'm going to say don't blow your fingers off with fireworks like another famous NFL player.
Yeah, be safe, be patriotic, but don't be a patriot.
I like that. That's pretty good. We'll leave it at that. So be safe out there, folks, and have fun. But again, be sensible, and we'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.